Funding for Indian Pride is provided by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Forest County Potawatomi Tribe, National City, the Otto Bremer Foundation, and the members of Prairie Public.
On this episode of Indian Pride, we will examine the history of American Indians. Hear how an alligator got its bumps, and witness a traditional hoop dancer. Hi, I'm Junie K. Randall, and welcome to Indian Pride. The rich history of America can never be completed without an authentic view of the colorful past of America's Indian nations. Indian Pride invites you on a brief journey to explore these magnificent and unique cultures.
It's really not Wisconsin. He said the correct interpretation should be Ni Johnson, because when they asked the Potawatomi, whose land is this? They said, Ni Johnson, it belongs to my kids. It doesn't belong to me, it belongs to my kids.
Can any of you tell me the amounts of states in this country that are Indian names? Mississippi is not an American word, Minnesota is not an American word. Kansas is not an American word. Texas is not an American word. It's an Indian word.
First contact was here on this coast, and land was taken, tribes were dying off. In Connecticut, we have 13 tribes that died from disease or war. We mixed pretty early on with the Europeans, so our survival was based on getting along with everybody, marrying into military families, and just being alone. And survival, any way you could, was key.
We like to think we own the whole state of Florida and parts of Georgia and Alabama as our territory. Our goal, long-term commitment is that if we have to buy Florida back, acre by acre, we'll do that.
We'd been relocated twice, once from Indiana to Kansas and Kansas to here. We bought this reservation for cash. We weren't given it by the federal government. This piece of land originally belonged to the Seminole Nation. As part of their relocation, as punishment for fighting on the side of the South in the Civil War, they took away half of their reservation and put other Indians on it. And we thought when we got down here we were going to be able to finally keep a piece of land because we could defend it in the U.S. courts. With the passage of the Allotment Act, we lost it anyway.
Indians are not driven by the same motivation that other so-called people of color or minorities are in America, because every other minority came here from somewhere else. And the driving force for those minorities was really what is called upward mobility. And that means where they came from was much worse than this country. They came here because there was opportunity to move ahead, to make some money, to do something, to grow. They couldn't do it in their own country. So they had everything to gain and nothing to lose. Indians, on the other hand, had everything to lose and nothing to gain. If you look at a map now, the map before 1492, it was all Indian land. And now they have these little postage stamp pieces of ground here and there in the different states called reservations. That's all they have left. So the driving force for Indian people really is not to gain what the majority culture has. It's to not lose any more than they've already lost.
My parents always said when I was growing up, the white man will come and things are gonna change. And sure enough, it was true. But all this land here, like where we're at, this was like a little wilderness area. Tall cottonwood trees.
History has an uncanny way of revealing itself. Many times it takes years for the truth to be told. For today's program, it is imperative that American people have an accurate picture of the interactions with American Indians. I'm very pleased to have as my guest today Dr. Duane Champagne, Professor of Sociology and American Indian Studies at UCLA. He is a member of the Faculty Advisory Committee of UCLA's Native Nations Law and Policy Center. He is also an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in North Dakota. Welcome to Indian Pride, Dr. Champagne.
Very pleased to be here, Judy Kay.
Before Christopher Columbus came to the New World, Indian people lived in a beautiful world of peace and harmony and humbleness. They had many stories that were very sacred and they passed them on. Would you be willing to share with us the creation story as it was before Christopher Columbus?
Well, there are many creation stories. There's hundreds, thousands of Indian communities with many creation stories. But the creation story sets out the basic rules of any society and community, the relationship of people to the plants, to the animals. In the native worldview, there are some common principles, and one is that generally, at least in North America, that the Creator is a benevolent gift giver, gives the form of government, the relations and organizations of families, clans, gives stewardship over the land, sets out the moral rules of how to behave toward each other, toward the plants, toward the animals. And the message is largely one of respect and order and balance. And that's the way the people lived under those rules. Those are the most central issues of Native communities. And they continue to this day. The people still live under those rules.
So these are the sacred teachings of the Indian nations back then, and they use these teachings for social, political relations?
Yes, I mean, in many communities, the social organization, the families, the clans, the government are often given by the Creator in the teachings or through intermediaries, various visions or various trickster figures that set up a sacred obligation by the people in the community to honor government, to honor elders, to respect clans, respect the plants and animals of the environment. People are not seen to be above plants and animals, are seen to be part of one cosmic vision given in the teachings.
So after that, what happened to the Indian people when they encountered the Europeans? Give us a little synopsis of that time.
Well, the world changes very rapidly. The
Right.
world is, in a certain sense, from the Native point of view, put out of balance, that it's very difficult to maintain the order given in the teachings. There are new markets that come into the world, so trade and exchange is very different. The land is being taken up and brought into ownership by the Europeans. There's a tremendous amount of political competition. There's an increase in wars. Native communities getting caught up in all of this. They are trying to defend their territories, defend their governments, trying to protect their culture within this new environment.
So to calm down the Indian people, what did the federal government then do to try to compensate for what was happening during that time?
Well, in the very beginning, there's a tremendous amount of political competition in North America. It's very unusual in the sense that there are multiple European powers trying to colonize North America.
Right.
There's the Dutch, the British, the French, the Spanish. And in the very beginning, the United States government emerges in this competitive environment. And the Indians are seen as largely political and trade allies. And so that the United States immediately moves to set up alliances, and that's all done by treaties. It's been done, treaties that have been done in the colonial period. There are thousands of those, and then the Americans very early, as 1775, 1777, started to negotiate treaties with Indians, tried to get them to be political as well as diplomatic allies.
So how many treaties are we talking about that they signed?
Well, in the pre-colonial period, if you count the United States and Canada, there are literally thousands of them. There are, most of the very early ones are diplomatic and trade, treaties of friendship, but the Americans take up the same, negotiating treaties. Treaties are agreements between two nations. It's a nation-to-nation relationship, so that the Europeans in the very beginning considered Native Americans independent nations, political entities that held territory, had governments, engaged in trade and political alliances. The United States probably negotiated over 800 treaties with Indians between 1775 and 1871. Only about 270 of those treaties were ever ratified in Congress by the Senate.
Right. Are there treaties today?
Yes, those treaties are still in power. According to American law, the treaties are still valid until Congress passes a law that says that they're not.
So then after that, they were moved to what we call now as Indian reservations, correct?
In a somewhat complicated process, yes. At first, in the 1830s and to the 1870s, there was a so-called removal policy, which many of the communities on the East Coast were moved to what was then Indian country, but is now what you would call Kansas and Oklahoma, and then ultimately to Oklahoma after the Civil War. There was a big policy trying to move many of the Indian communities into that area. That by the 1870s, that found that policy was not working, and so that after that, there was a big effort to move tribes into reservations. By the 1890s, most Indian communities are living on small reservations, remnants of their former territories.
Fast forward to 1934 and tell us a little bit about the Indian Reorganization Act.
Well, the Indian Reorganization Act is sort of a brief policy period that was trying to eliminate some of the policies that occurred from 1871, the end of treaty making, up until the 1930s. There was that period is one of a tremendous amount of forced assimilation in Indian country. Children were sent to boarding schools to learn English, to learn American ways of life. Land on the reservations, what was left of Indian territory, was being allotted and given to individuals. Much of the land was being sold. 90 million acres are lost in Indian country during that time. Indian culture, Indian language were all suppressed. The Indian Reorganization Act of the 1930s happens at the same time as it's often called the Indian New Deal, happens at the same time virtually as the American New Deal during the Depression, in a crisis situation. And it was thought that Indian policy was not working, and there was a tremendous amount of poverty and
So
illness.
then after that, they came up with, now they were going to terminate some of the tribes, correct?
Well, after the Indian Reorganization Act, which really didn't work very well, attempted to provide more tribal governments, the policy actually turned very quickly toward assimilating Indians into mainstream society, especially after World War II, and they terminated Indian communities. That was essentially ending reservations, liquidating the land, and having American Indians become, American citizens.
So from 1960 to 1988, basically, now we had a new policy called the self-determination period of our history. Briefly tell us what that meant.
Well, there was a tremendous reaction to the termination policy. It was certainly something of an unfunded mandate. And so the tribes in many of the states allied in Congress and were able to stop the termination policy by the early 1960s. And for some time, people floundered around for a policy, what to do in Indian country. And it fell on by the late 60s self-determination policy, which was largely trying to strengthen the bureaucracies of tribal governments and sending funds ultimately directly to tribes, bypassing the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which had administered Indian country since the early 1800s. And so tribal governments became much more serious. They administered programs, had direct relationships with the federal government, and many people started to work around tribal governments.
Dwayne, where are we today?
What's characteristic of the present period is a tremendous amount of self-consciousness in Native communities. This arose after the termination period and the movement against it, but it happens similarly through the Red Power movement, where lots of Indian rights were being brought into general media, and Native people who often had been very much repressed psychologically began to take much more pride in their identity, and so there's a resurgence of Indian issues and Indian rights. In a certain sense, some people say that that's a movement that's akin to the civil rights movement, but much less well known. And I think that's what the period is right now. There's a tendency, since the 1980s at least, that there is not a whole lot of support, for sort of neutral support from the American government, courts, the legislature, the Congress, and the executive, but Native communities themselves have taken it on to try to restore their cultures, their language, their governments.
Well, Dwayne, we're running out of time, and this is such a huge topic and so important, but you know, you did such a wonderful job in the limited time we have. We greatly appreciate you coming to our show today and joining us for Indian Pride, and we want to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us on a very broad topic of historical overview for Indian people, and we are very proud of you here at Indian Pride. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
A long time ago, alligator used to walk up on 2 feet and stand up, and he had smooth skin, and his head would be big and long, but it spoke. There was also a rabbit, which we call Chukfalaji, and Chukfalaji means the lying rabbit. He would come around and tell stories and get people in trouble, and he would do evil things. But the alligator was a trusting soul, and he loved people, and he kind of believed in them. He got along really good with other people, and he was really friendly. One day he went and bought a car, and the rabbit saw him, and he got jealous, and he told him, "Oh, your car can't go through that swamp right there. See that deep slough right there? That's deep. Your car can't go through it." And the alligator says, "Huh, my car can do it. Watch me." So he took off into that slough. As he went putting into the swamp there, the rabbit started a fire and ran around the whole slough and caught it on fire. The fire overwhelmed him and burned up his car and burned him up. But as he caught fire, he jumped down into the slough, and there was like a little small stream of water flowing. So he kind of rolled into it and was rolling around, and that's where he stayed. And the fire burned his back and everything, and he laid in that swamp where the little river was, and right into the mud. And he stayed there with the mud covering him inside the mud, and right where the stream was going through, because that stream was real cold. So the rabbit burned him up. And that's how the gator got the little bumps all on his back. And that's how come he's all black. And he likes to live in the streams where the water is flowing all the time, because he still remembers that time when he was burned alive. So that's how the alligator got his bumps on his back. If you ever see alligator.
Our performer today is an international artist who carries the spirit and vitality of our ancestors like no other in Indian country. I'm honored and proud to introduce Mr. Kevin Locke, an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe in North Dakota.
Basically what the hoop dance is all about, it is a depiction or portrayal of transformation. You know, now of course out here in the prairies, northern plains, everything is going into a dormant stage, so that you have a condition of, lifelessness, colorlessness. But then when the solar energy becomes intensified in the spring, then a impetus is communicated to the earth, so that suddenly everything that was lifeless and colorless and dormant, suddenly you have this explosion of color and sound and movement and fragrance. Of course, that's what you call the spring, which is the most fantastic phenomenon that occurs up here at this latitude in the physical environment. This is in essence what the hoop dance portrays as transformation. And I use the 28 hoops because there's the lunar cycle of 28 days where you say every day of that period, you look out, you're going to see like a new color. You're going to smell a new fragrance. You're going to hear a new sound as the birds rapidly return in the spring. You're going to see new shapes as all the spring clouds suddenly begin to reappear. Within this 28-day period, all these different signs of spring have returned into the world. So you depict that, the number of 28. And then the four colors, of course, represent this paradigm of fours that you see is so prevalent in the native culture. They say there's 4 stages of life, that you strive to attain, like your childhood, your parenthood, grandparenthood, and then, of course, the great-grandparenthood. These are the stages of life that a person ideally can attain. And so the hoop, of course, is the world's most ubiquitous or pervasive archetype. And so really for all peoples, the hoop symbolizes completion, peace, unity, balance, harmony, wholeness. Main practitioners of the hoop dance are what they call the Elk Society. They're a service organization, and what they do is they perform it as a prayer. Through this portrayal, the people can be restored to wholeness, not just physical, not just emotional, not just mental, but spiritual wholeness by invoking all these themes of transformation. And also, of course, represents how each one of us has the potential to manifest these dynamic, life-sustaining powers. So in the hoop dance, it just shows how we as human beings are part of this totality of creation. And we need to find our place, to be the flowers, to be the stars, to be all these elements that can bring life into the world.
I'd like to thank all of our special guests for sharing their gifts and talents with us. We invite you to join us next time as we present another great showcase of Indian pride. And whenever you get a chance, do something kind for a child. Bye-bye for now.
Funding for Indian Pride is provided by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Forest County Potawatomi Tribe, National City, the Otto Bremer Foundation, and the members of Prairie Public.